Hi, I'm Stephen Moore, and I'd like to share an excerpt of my short story Ranger that can be found in the Mobile Writers Guild Anthology, Halloween Pieces. October 3rd, 1893. Teresa closed the book, Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, smiled, and gave out a contented sigh. What a great read! Sitting on a wicker chair swing, suspended by a thick rope strung from the branch of a large oak, the 23-year-old redhead gently pushed herself back and forth with her foot. She enjoyed her occasional weekend readings here in her backyard, spending time with her beloved border collie Ranger. The gentle breeze only added to the pleasant October afternoon. It wasn't the same as it used to be, but with nearly a year since his passing, she could still feel Ranger's presence from time to time, and always when she was here reading to him as she did for years when he was alive. She gazed at the patch of clover, with its round white blooms filling a large, almost circular area only a few feet away from her. At the center of the patch was the 2-foot-tall statue of a Rottweiler sitting majestically with its blue crystal eyes watching her. Of course, the granite dog looked nothing like her black and white Ranger, but it served as a fitting stone for the border collie, who she buried next to it, the marker and the flowers always serving as a reminder of her friend. The statue was put there by Teresa's grandmother, Lenore, when she lived here, long before Teresa inherited the estate upon her grandmother's passing a couple of years earlier, April of 1891. The statue had been there for as long as Teresa could remember and was probably placed in the yard before she was even born. Lenore was rumored to be a witch. She wasn't feared. All over town, Teresa was told stories of how her grandmother was loved by everyone, often taking the role of doctor or midwife when needed. Her knowledge of healing herbs and roots, and Lord knows what else, was nearly legendary. There were stories of doctors actually calling on her assistance in times of desperation. In many cases, she succeeded where they couldn't. And then there was the amulet. Teresa held the amulet that hung from the necklace around her neck, also left to her by her grandmother. It had the same blue crystal at its center as the eyes of the dog statue, only considerably smaller. Rumor was that Lenore would often include the amulet as part of her ritual of healing, though Teresa was never given any specifics. The crystals embedded in the amulet and the ones in the statue, they glowed. Always. Not in a grand way, but faintly they glowed. In the bright of day, they captured the surrounding light, and, though it could just be one's imagination, they always appeared to be a little brighter than they should be. At night, however still faint, the light was obvious. The crystals likely held some form of chemical which drank in the sunlight when it could, and then released it in the dark, much like the hands of her uncle's clock, which was covered with some glow-in-the-dark paint. She rested the amulet against her chest and pulled the slip of paper from her book, which had been acting as a bookmark, and unfolded it. She scanned it, smiled, and folded it back. Teresa nodded to the patch of clover. Well, boy, it looks like I'm off to Africa. She pushed the letter back into the book. An archaeologist friend of mine says he has some unusual bones he wants to share with me. Her smile grew. It should be about October 31st when I get to the dig site. She patted the head of the statue dog and walked toward the house. A spooky African cave filled with strange bones on Halloween. How appropriate. October 8th. Teresa looked out at the ocean from the deck of the steamship SS New York, formerly the City of New York, renamed just a few years earlier, as she had been informed by 9-year-old David, a fellow passenger and apparent steamship expert. No land was in sight, but she had just finished a pleasant conversation with the captain, who assured her England was less than a day away. The luck of good weather was on their side, making this leg of her trip about 6 days. With luck and some creative planning, she hoped to keep the rest of her journey under 3 weeks. She turned and looked across the deck and noticed an elderly couple relaxing on deck chairs. Sitting next to them was a black and white dog. From a distance, looked very much like her beloved Ranger. I didn't know they'd allow a dog to run free on a ship. She moved closer in hopes of saying hello to the couple and maybe petting their friend. The dog stood and walked away. Teresa considered introducing herself to the couple, but decided to follow the dog instead. Then they could get acquainted as she returned their pet. She saw him sitting in the shadows of a doorway. She stopped. The hairs on her neck bristled, and a wave of cold passed over her. It was Ranger. She was sure of it. His eyes were glowing an eerie blue. He stood and jumped at her. Startled, she fell back and landed on her butt. In that moment, he was gone. She realized she wasn't breathing and released her breath. Lightheaded, she rose to her feet and looked around. He was nowhere to be seen. She reached into her blouse and pulled the amulet out, then reluctantly made her way back to her room. October 28. Teresa was well into Africa and only a couple of days away from the dig site. She had just finished a nice dinner and was on her way back to her tent. The trading company she was traveling with had set up camp near a large village while they conducted their business. After several hours of talking with the locals, shopping and eating, she was ready to get some sleep before they packed up and headed out in the morning. There's nothing more wonderful than being able to sample the local dishes when traveling. I love the atmosphere of the restaurants, the people. It makes the experience of the culture that much more complete. She stopped. The hairs on the back of her neck tingled again, like it did on the ship. The specter dog stepped from the shadows and moved in front of her. Ranger, it is you, isn't it? She carefully moved her closed hand toward the dog. There's a good boy. His eyes glowing blue, he walked slowly towards her, showing his teeth, and growled. She couldn't move. Her body went cold as a bead of sweat formed and ran slowly down her face. What's the matter, boy? Other than the fact that you're a ghost and I'm probably insane. It looked like her lost Ranger, but never his entire life did he ever appear threatening. It had his form, but not his manner. He jumped. She fell to her knees and ducked her head into her arms. A man yelled from behind her. Teresa opened her eyes and turned quickly. Black and white fur moved in a blur. The man fell to his back and held his arms up as cloth and skin were torn into by the wild canine's teeth. The man swung his arms wildly. Losing his grip, a machete dropped from his hand and fell to his side. She realized he had planned to harm her. Ranger was protecting me. A crowd formed quickly from the nearby tents. In the confusion, Teresa didn't notice the dog leave, but he was gone. In his wake, a large muscular man lay crying on the ground. A short while later, he was taken away by local authorities. She said a quiet prayer to herself and gently pressed the amulet under her shirt against her chest. Heaven help me, Grandma Lenore. This is your doing. That was a sample of my short story, Ranger, in Halloween Pieces. You can find it on Amazon.com.